So, good afternoon. I'm Kathy Beloris, and this is Impacts on Ashby. And today I'm talking to our district representative at the State House, Margaret Scarsdale. So, if I remember correctly, Margaret is about halfway through her second term as our rep. Is that correct?
A little bit more than halfway through. I was sworn in on New Year's Day on 2025, so just a little bit over the halfway mark,
Wow.
Second term.
Okay. And what other towns do you represent?
So besides Ashby, I have Dunstable, I have precincts 2 and 3 in Groton, precincts A, B1, C, and D in Lunenburg, and then all of Pepperell and all of Townsend.
And precincts A through Z in Ashby.
Yes, and I love them all.
Okay. But a term for a state representative is 2 years, correct?
It is. It is. It goes by so fast, though. I think before I was elected, 2 years would just seem miles away, and now, boom, boom.
Well, yeah, and I would think it takes a better part of the first year to get your feet wet.
Oh, the first term? I mean, understanding how committees work and policies and procedures and learning the district more. Obviously, you're out when you're campaigning and learning them, but really diving into issues, it is quite a bit to learn. And
Sure.
I think for myself, for my first term, it's kind of a balance, being at the State House, being in the district, and different reps handle it different ways. The advice to me when I was first sworn in was, you have a brand new town, Lunenburg, which was absorbed into the 1st Middlesex in the 2020 redistricting. You need to be in your towns, like getting to know them and working with boards and fire chiefs and police chiefs, et cetera, et cetera. So I spent more time in the district my first term, which is great. I have wonderful relationships now, but now trying to flip that and build more relationships at the State House the
Sure.
second term.
Right. Well, and actually you led me right into my next question. Because to be honest, I see you at so many events in Ashby. It's like you've been our rep for more than 3 years, quite honestly. And I can tell you I have never, in my long tenure as an Ashby resident, seen anyone in town as much as I've seen you. And from the perspective of most of the people that I know, it's greatly appreciated.
Well, I have to say I have a special place in my heart for Ashby, and I think that really got kick-started when I was campaigning in 2021. So Ashby and Dunstable are 2 towns that are about 3,000 people each, so the smallest of the 6 towns, the other 4, 10 and 11,000. And when I was campaigning, I heard over and over from Ashby and Dunstable, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. We know we're small. We don't expect to see you. And that was just not okay with me. So I committed to everyone that I would represent Ashby as passionately as I did, the 4 larger towns, because everybody deserves that kind of representation. And it has been a joy to do that.
Well, and again, I think we appreciate it. Can you talk a little bit about what you've done here in town and when you tend to visit and what sort of events and so forth?
Oh, yes. So I think one of the most impactful and most recent is leading the effort to bring the essential emergency services back to this region after the closure of Neshoba Valley Medical Center. And even beyond that, once we had the satellite emergency facility plan in place, it's going up in Groton. It's still slated to open in November of this year. So in August of 2024, we had nothing but a shuttered hospital, and barely 2 years later, we're going to have a satellite emergency facility in Groton. So that work was, I think, monumental and so impactful, because the closure really had a huge detrimental effect on our fire departments. They were out straight because now they couldn't travel to the closest hospital. Now everybody was traveling to, usually either Leominster or, for our side of the district, Emerson. Now they're trying to absorb those 16,000 emergency room visits a year that Neshoba Valley had done. So, God love our firefighters, because they were heroic and they took on that challenge. But it's really nice to see that satellite emergency facility. And then beyond that, Senator Cronin and I led the effort to fight for supplemental funding, because all that overtime impacted town budgets.
Sure did.
And we secured $5 million solely for the 13 towns affected by the Neshoba Valley closure. It was a $10 million supplemental budget for all hospitals that were struggling a little, but we carved out half of that for this district and for Ashby, and I know that that's been a huge help for them and their budget and the town budget as well. I think running quite parallel with that in importance is building the statewide coalition to fix the school funding formula. That has really been, a long-standing problem, and I'm happy to talk about that more in a little bit. But I think for the impact to Ashby, both of those are really noteworthy, and I'm proud to have done that. And then again, on the money side, and I'm looking at my notes because there's a hefty little list here, and I want to make sure I get the numbers right. In the FY26 budget, which we're still in, that goes through June of this year, I brought in $21 million for the North Middlesex school budget, $500,000 for roads just in FY26 and just for Ashby, and another $500,000 in something called unrestricted general government aid. Most people refer to it as UGA. And unlike every other line item in the budget that has a number and it says you must spend this on transportation, you can only spend this on infrastructure, whatever, UGA, the towns can spend it on whatever they see as an infrastructure need, a personnel need. It doesn't matter, whatever you have a concern about. The town officials can say, we're going to spend that bucket of money on that. So that was $500,000. And then in addition, there's another bucket of money called earmarks that happen every year. And those are ad hoc, one-time kind of occurrences. We need to refurbish this studio, whatever it is. If the town, I'm in conversations with the town right now about FY27 earmarks, they give me their priority list and I go and try to get funding for that. So in that earmark bucket, I got money for infrastructure improvements and furniture, new furniture for the Council on Aging. Renovations to Ashby's beloved gazebo on the town common, and a police car retrofit, which the police chief was asking for an Ashby cruiser. So all of those buckets of money, money anywhere helps the town everywhere. So that's on the money side. And then when I tend to visit, I love talking about that because I am really, as you know, I'm here spring, summer, winter, and fall. I come to memorial events. I come to veteran events. I love the Council on Aging murder mystery dinner. I've taken part in cleanup days, like picking up trash on South Row. office hours, tractor pulls, and I was just here for Chief Bustle's retirement party. And technically it wasn't here in Ashby, but you know it was full of Ashby people and friends and well-wishers. So and I'm here today and happy to be here.
Great, great. Just so you know, the town is split. Some of us call that structure on the common a gazebo, and then many of us call it the bandstand.
I have
So
heard
that's
it
a thing.
referred to as both. So money for the gazebo and the bandstands. It's kind of like a double dip
That's
for me.
right. That's right. So the elephant in the room, I think, is Ashby Elementary. I don't think I'm over-dramatizing when I say that the school committee has put the final nail in the coffin of that building, and Ashby having its own K through 4 school. Can you talk a little bit about your position through this process and how it has, it looks like, come to a conclusion, and address the issue about the regional school spending? And the reason I just want to clarify, and I don't know if it's because of some of the things I've done through my career, but just because the school closed, it isn't something you could stop from happening.
Correct.
Necessarily.
Yes.
Just because Neshoba Hospital closed, it's not something you could stop from happening. And so if you could talk about the school, and then maybe even just a little bit of the process. I mean, why can't our state rep do these things just at the drop of a hat?
Yes, yes. Well, I remember the school committee meeting back in 2022. Again, I was still campaigning at that time. I hadn't been elected, and the school committee had a meeting. They held it at Ashby Elementary School in the gym, and the gym was full, the bleachers were full, and listening to parents and grandparents get up and students get up and talk about what Ashby Elementary School meant to them. From that day, I have maintained that every town needs a school, and especially Ashby, and especially Ashby Elementary School. That's it's just like the heart of this town. And I came to the school's last day last summer when school was out and the kids were walking out, and that was really heartbreaking to see. I mean, you could see the community behind that heartbreak. You could see how much people cared about each other, and teachers trying to be brave for the students, and students trying to be brave for their parents. And I really wanted to be there to stand with Ashby, because so many of the people there are my friends, and I care about them, and I care about the school. And it still touches me. And I wish I had a magic wand and could have waved it, but those decisions are the purview of the school committee. And right. I mean, imagine if I were to walk into an Ashby Select Board meeting and say, no, you can't do it like that. You have to do it like this. Those elected officials would not be happy. That is their domain, and that is the same for the school committee. And I worked with the Massachusetts School Building Authority. I worked with the delegation, worked with town officials, like, is there any rabbit we can pull out of the hat? Is there any stone that we have not overturned, something that we can do? And sadly, there just wasn't. And some things are just not in my control. And I will say, trying to save a hospital really isn't part of my domain either. But in that case, there just were avenues that I could pursue. I could get other people on board, and it did not happen in this case.
Right. And in the case of the school, even though you couldn't go to the school committee, you couldn't go to the select board and hit down the hammer. At the same time, there's this thing about changing the school formula, the funding formula.
Oh, yes.
And I just read that the governor is possibly getting on board with it. So could you speak to that, your role in that, and where we're at?
Yeah. So in 2023, when I took office, there was really nothing, Kathy. There was no coalition, there was no education, there was no real recognition of the severity of this problem. So I spent the better part of that year trying to understand the school funding formula, which is not just one funding formula, it is multiple formulas. They all interplay with each other and overlap. There's Chapter 70 and Chapter 71 and circuit breaker and regional school transportation. That formula affects all 318 school districts in the Commonwealth, but in trying to unpack that and sift through this data that also goes on like population size and your wealth and how much commercial industry that you have. Again, there's so many different pieces to this formula. So going to different meetings, trying to understand that. In July of 2024, I brought together all 6 of the towns, multiple town leaders, school committee chairs and select board chairs. Department of Elementary and Secondary Education came down, and we collectively started to try to coalesce around, all right, here are all the factors, here's the playing field. Now, like, what would be the next steps? And I mean, I've tried to think of an analogy for a long time, but imagine that your car was making a noise. You don't just open the hood and start pulling at wires and say, well, maybe that'll fix it. And that's the school funding formula. You don't want an unintended consequence like, all right, we'll fund regional transportation at 100% in this bucket, but that ties to this bucket, so all of a sudden you only get 20% of special education funded.
Okay.
So we started coalescing around a plan in the summer of 2024. By the fall, I had built out that coalition because, again, even 6 districts in the scheme of 318, it's not a lot of noise there. So I figured out there are 200, at that time there were 211 school districts that have the same problem, minimum aid, so they don't get adequate funding. Their funding doesn't keep up with things like cost of inflation and contract increases and D-bus company increases. So we expanded the coalition of the 6 districts to reach out to the 218, and then, just for more power, brought in other statewide organizations like the Massachusetts Teachers Association. They care deeply about adequate school funding. The Massachusetts Association of Regional Schools and the Massachusetts Association of School Committees and the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents. So by the fall of that year, we had coalesced around a set of common asks that we were all going to stand for. Because if you say, well, I want A, and I say B, and Jim says C, and somebody else says D, E, F, G, it gets lost in the wind if we all say we want A, B, and C. So we agreed on what we would ask for, both in the FY25 budget, and there was a supplemental budget making its way along the path at the same time, and policy changes. We put that forward, again, a new coalition, and we made some pretty good success. And in the FY26 budget, throughout the year and heading into FY26, we kept building on that coalition, which now minimum aid districts change every year based on calculations and how many people moved in and out of the district, and that's complicated. Now there are 232 of those. So trying to bring those people on board. So in the FY26 budget, we had some really good success. Historic levels of regional school transportation funding, historic levels of circuit breaker reimbursement, and there's something called a per pupil minimum aid. I think every dollar helps. In 2023, the FY24 budget, my first one, minimum per student aid was at $30 per student. And in this FY26 budget, it was up to $150, and that's what the governor signed. So now, the budget was passed, there was Christmas and everything. We are regrouping. I just was on a fiscal action crisis call on Monday, trying to get those asks again for the FY27 budget, which, as you alluded to, the governor talked about on Wednesday in the very first Ways and Means budget hearing for FY27. And she acknowledged, we have a problem, we've got to address that. And I was very, very heartened to hear my colleagues, because again, educating them about how we can be purposeful about this work, how we can be successful in it. Here are quantitative things, not here's a huge problem, look at all these formulas, what are we going to do? But, here's what we've laid out, to hear those colleagues also on Ways and Means with me say, this is a priority, we have to do this. And just as an aside, I was also very happy to hear the governor call me out by name for the work on the hospital and securing that $5 million. So she listens, she understands, and she said she's committed to this work. So that is very heartening.
Well, that's overwhelming, quite honestly, because I was just going to say, because between the hospital, I mean, that's like a David and Goliath kind of thing. I mean, that's huge. And I have to say, I'm impressed simply by the fact that this is your third year.
I know. I know.
So, yeah. And I mean, people think that, well, geez, she's been in there 3 months. What has she done so far? And I know that's not the way it works, but a lot of people don't know what goes on under that big gold dome.
Yep.
And so, no, that is impressive. And, do things happen as quickly as we'd like them to? Clearly not. But you've made some great progress. And I think when we're talking about what's going to impact Ashby, I think those are two heavy hitters. Our school next door to here is now locked up.
Yeah.
And, I'm not sure that there's a lot that we can do about that in terms of within the North Middlesex district.
Yes.
They've made it pretty clear that it is what it is and it's not going to be revisited. However, there are some other options for the building, and as you said, it's kind of the heart of the town.
Yes.
One of the few hearts of the town. The library is another.
Yes.
So, do you have any thoughts on what might be possible, what might be available at the state level? What would you see as possibilities for that building?
Yeah, so the town has already reached out to me, town officials, and we're having those early conversations. And I do have to say, the town has always been such a strong partner. I have a close working relationship with the select board and with your town administrator, and they know they can call me at night, on the weekend, anytime at all. And so those explorations are really, they're really just beginning. Maybe it was Monday or last week, but like within the last few days. And maybe an Olympic analogy, like I don't want to get out over my skis, but I will say, if people in the community have ideas, you should absolutely reach out to Mary Doherty, the town administrator. I've heard a lot of different things, and envision that building being energized again and serving a purpose for Ashby.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on what it is, it could also serve other communities as well.
Sure. That's, as someone who started there in first grade, I get it.
Yes.
It's very sad driving by, quite honestly.
It is.
The next thing is, I know I've been reading, budget season is in full swing.
It is.
And you are on Ways and Means Committee, correct?
Yes.
That's kind of a big committee. That's a big deal.
That is the most powerful committee at the State House. If a bill is going to come to the House floor or the Senate floor or go to the governor, it goes through Ways and Means.
Sure.
So it is a fabulous learning opportunity.
And so, is there any insight you can offer us? I believe some of the budget structure was actually presented to Ways and Means the other day. So can you talk about that?
Yes, so I think it was about a 5-hour hearing, and the governor presents her budget. She takes questions. All of the constitutional officers, the Attorney General, the Auditor, the Inspector General, Secretary Galvin, they present their budget and try to highlight where they see concerns or opportunities. For instance, Secretary Galvin was talking about the number of ballot questions that are probably going to make it over the line, excuse me, and be on the ballot in November. And just because of the sheer volume, and you get that booklet that he mails that tells you about each ballot question, pros and cons, et cetera, et cetera. He said that in the past, for as long as he's been in office, they staple those together and they fit in an envelope and you get it. Now it's going to be so thick that he's going to have to look into having that glued and having it be almost like a booklet. So the cost, I can't remember if he said it was going to triple, but he said we don't have enough money for that. So that's something that secretariats will point out, like that you better get on this. And one interesting thing I know, I looked at the budget as soon as it came out, and some of the numbers weren't where I wanted them to be, but I was explaining to another constituent, like if the governor came out with a budget that met everything, like there's nothing for the House to do to say, look, we fought for this, and nothing for the Senate to do. So her budget is a starting point, and just like the per pupil minimum aid that started at 30 and ended at 150, that's 5 times a number. That's what these conversations over the next 2.5 months for us, because the House votes on the budget the last week in April. So right now, we had our first hearing with the governor. We will be, the committee that I sit on, House Ways and Means, or Joint Ways and Means, will be traveling across the Commonwealth, Cape Cod, Springfield, Amherst, to have hearings on every single executive level department, like Health and Human Services, Transportation, Economic Development, and certainly Education. So it is such an opportunity to learn. I'm kind of a policy wonk and a numbers wonk. Like I love the information that comes out of that, and it helps me go back to the towns and say, here's what I'm hearing. What's our plan to do it collectively with them? Because back to your earlier point about the hospital and the school funding, I love bringing people together, and I want to have everybody in the room, like a representative from every viewpoint. So kind of like when I was on the select board. So when you get to town meeting or when you get to the budget floor, you have buy-in. And the thing that's so important about having that collective voice is that you begin to realize you can't get everything you want, and I can't get everything I want, but maybe you can get 2 things, I can get 2 things, and then we can meet in the middle on 2 more things. And then next year we can move that middle to another point. So that work of collaboration is so powerful. And for me, if I can just detour for one brief second, like in the scheme of national events, like when I look at the work that happens in the district, it is so hopeful and it is so meaningful, and it is because people say, I want to work for the greater good, whether you're Republican or Democrat or independent or unenrolled or Green Party. I care about Ashby. I want this to happen, and I will be there to help you make that happen. And people see that, and it's been such a phenomenal experience.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that's and speaking. So you mentioned Ways and Means, and I know that you're on some other committees, which gives you an opportunity to be able to see into situations a bit better. What are the other committees that you're in right now?
Yes, thank you for asking. So telecommunications, utilities, and energy, we call it TUI for short. So, Unitel, Eversource, anything having to do with energy, grid problems, that's covered there. Environment and natural resources, so protecting those assets and trying to shore them up. And then something near and dear to my heart because of my age, aging and independence, which used to be elder affairs, but we've modernized it to recognize that people are pretty active in their 60s and 70s and 80s. I'm thinking about the murderer in year before last Ashby Council on Aging mystery dinner. Remember that fine gentleman, Tim Bowman? So you can be over 60 and still be quite vibrant.
Well, I wasn't at that dinner, but this year's was one of our senior couples as well, and I won't mention names, but
I know who you mean.
Yeah, it's
star citizens. Yes.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun.
So to close the loop on the committees, like that's an opportunity to look at legislation and work to try to improve it, because all of those things, Ways and Means, utilities, environment, aging, they affect not only our everyday lives, but they affect our future. So it's really rewarding work.
Great. Well, with a third of Ashby's population being over 60, we appreciate that. So I guess just in wrapping up, if someone wants to address one or more of these issues, when you have office hours in Ashby.
I do.
And when does that happen?
So my first term, I did all 6 towns every month, which between the committee work and traveling to Boston and constituent work and reading, I didn't mention there were 7,000 bills filed this year, and all of those get a hearing. So I shifted at the beginning of my second term, so now I do 3 towns the first month, 3 towns the second, and then I put those. So I will actually be back in Ashby on February 25th, which is my anniversary. And you can find my office hours on my website, which is representativescarsdale.com. Also, that website has every single committee vote I've ever taken since day one. So if you want to know where I stand, you can look up any of my committee votes and see where I took a stand on those.
Great. Well, I promise that as time goes on, I'm going to have you back,
I want
if
to
at all
come
possible,
back. Yes.
to ask you more questions and how things are proceeding.
Yes.
In the meantime, I appreciate you coming. Again, I see Margaret around town more often than I ever thought I would, and we appreciate what you're doing for the town. And I thank you, and any questions, please reach out to Representative Scarsdale, because she's she has been here for us, and it's appreciated.
Thank you, Kathy.
So you're welcome. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.
Bye.